Good evening, everyone. My name is Lopez Matthews, and I am the chair of the ASALH TV committee. And I would like to thank you for joining us as we celebrate this year's newest national holiday, Juneteenth, where we commemorate the end of the institution of slavery. And I'm so excited that you've decided to join us this evening as we welcome Professor Annette Gordon-Reed, Professor Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, and Dr. Marvin Delaney as we discuss this important commemoration. And so I would like to begin by inviting Dr. Marvin Delaney, Deputy Director and Chief Operations Officer for the Dallas African American Museum. He is also an Associate Professor of History Emeritus, former Interim Director of the Center for African American Studies, and the former Chair of the Department of History at the University of Texas, Arlington. During his 42 years as a history professor before his retirement in 2016, he taught at 4 universities: Ohio State, St. Olaf College, the College of Charleston, and the University of Texas at Arlington. In Charleston, in the Dallas-Fort Worth communities, he has literally taken, quote, history to the people through teacher training workshops on pedagogy and content, and through writing curricula for courses in American and African American history. Dr. Delaney has published and edited 4 books, including his path-breaking Black Police in America in 1996. His important scholarship on policing and criminal justice includes the essays, The Texas Negro Police Officers Association, The Origins of Black Police Unionism in the Houston Review, Integrating the Police in the South in the Avery Review, and The Troubled Origins of American Policing in the Crime Report, May 2015. And most importantly, Dr. Delaney is a part of ASALH's W. Marvin Delaney branch in Dallas, Texas. One of the great things about our association is that we are national and we have branches that represent us around the country. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Marvin Delaney. Welcome, Dr. Delaney. And Dr. Delaney, you are unfortunately muted, and so I need you to unmute your mic, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you again, Lopez, for the invitation to talk about our branch in Dallas-Fort Worth. Believe it or not, ASALH goes back a long way in Texas. In the 1930s, Lorenzo Green was in Texas recruiting in Houston. That is helping Carter G. Woodson expand the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in Houston and in Texas. There was a branch at Bishop College in 1937, and their charter was actually signed by Carter G. Woodson. So we actually have this document in our archives at the African American Museum in Dallas. Of course, we celebrate Juneteenth big time in Texas. Ever since Granger landed in Galveston in 1865, on June 19th, we have been celebrating Juneteenth. We do some special things. We have barbecue. We have red soda water. We have parades. We have rodeos. We have a number of things to indeed carry out the celebration of Juneteenth. One special year was in October of 1936, when the state of Texas celebrated its centennial. African Americans throughout the state of Texas came to Dallas to celebrate Juneteenth, and basically, sort of set the tone for continuing that very important celebration of Juneteenth in the state of Texas. And of course, ASALH has been in Texas, as I said, literally since the 1930s. And our branch was founded sort of in 2013, and then we received our charter in 2019. So Juneteenth and ASALH sort of go together in Texas, in that we celebrated each June. We do a variety of programs through our branch. Today, for example, as I said, this year, for example, as I said, we're going to do barbecue and red soda water. We're going to have a presentation on Juneteenth. We're going to have music. There's even a parade that will come down Martin Luther King Street into Fair Park. So it's going to be a wonderful celebration, and I'm glad that I can be a part of this presentation today to talk about Juneteenth and its relationship to ASALH in Texas. Thank you. Now you're muted.
Thank you so much, Dr. Delaney, for speaking to us, and thank you for bringing those great words. Without further ado, I'm going to transition us to our main event. And so first, I would like to introduce Dr. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham. She is the National President of ASALH. She is also the Victor S. Thomas Professor of History and of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. At Harvard, she chaired the Department of African and African American Studies from 2006 to 2013, and in 2018 to 2020, she chaired the History Department, the first African American to hold this position. Professor Higginbotham thoroughly revised the classic African American History Survey From Slavery to Freedom, which was first published by John Hope Franklin in 1947. She is the co-author with Franklin of this book's 9th edition, and most recently, the 10th edition, published in 2021. A pioneering scholar in African American women's history, she authored the prize-winning book, Righteous Discontent, The Women's Movement in the Black Baptist Church, 1880 to 1920, and co-edited with Henry Louis Gates Jr., the 12-volume African American National Biography. Higginbotham is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, most notably the National Humanities Medal from President Barack Obama in 2015, and most recently on May 2nd, 2021, Duke University conferred on her the honorary doctorate. She will be in conversation with Professor Annette Gordon-Reed, who is the Carl M. Loeb University Professor at Harvard University. A highly acclaimed author, she has won 16 book prizes, including the Pulitzer Prize in History in 2009 and the National Book Award in 2008 for her book, The Hemmingses of Monticello, An American Family. Time will not permit me to list all of her many books, but two other notable ones are Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, An American Controversy, and the book Vernon Can Read, a Memoir, which she wrote in collaboration with the late Vernon Jordan. Her most recent book, On Juneteenth, was published this year and is already a New York Times bestseller. Gordon-Reed was the Vivian Harmsworth Visiting Professor of American History in Britain at the University of Oxford, Queen's College from 2014 to 2015. She was the 2018 to 2019 president of the Society for Historians of the Early American Republic. She is currently president of the Ames Foundation. Professor Gordon-Reed has received many honors and fellowships, most notably the MacArthur Fellowship, also known as the Genius Award. She's the recipient of the National Humanities Medal, which is presented by the President of the United States. And so without further ado, I would like to bring to you Dr. Brooks Higginbotham and Professor Gordon-Reed. Thank you all for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Can you hear us? I guess so, Annette.
Yep, I guess so.
Well, thank you, Lopez, and thank you, Marvin. As you can see, ASALH is throughout the nation. We have 48 branches, but we wanted you to see our Texas branch so that you could see how Juneteenth is celebrated in a big way. Yes. Now, we're celebrating today also because it is our great honor to feature you, Annette Gordon-Reed, in a conversation about your new book on Juneteenth. Mm-hmm. I have known you for many years, as you know, and I am, as I tell you often, so very proud of you. I'm proud of you because of your impeccable, groundbreaking scholarship widely acclaimed for its great depth of research and analysis. Your recent book on Juneteenth has a unique quality, however, because it's the first book by you, at least that I know, that incorporates your reflections on your own personal experiences. And in your hands, Annette, the memoir approach to history has proved to be an especially effective way to think about the long memory of Juneteenth and its meaning, not only for you, not only for Black Americans, but for all America. So I'd like to begin our conversation by calling the attention of our audience to a certain misperception. I'll call it a misperception about the original Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865. And by misperception, I am referring to comments that we often hear today, such as Juneteenth is the day when slavery ended in the United States. Now, you certainly don't make such a statement in your book, but I would like for you to clarify the place of Juneteenth in the chain of historical events that led to the legal end of slavery in our nation.
Well, thank you, Evelyn, and thank you for those kind words. June 19th, 1865, when Gordon Granger comes to Galveston and makes his announcement, he's announcing the end of slavery in Texas. It was not the end of slavery in the United States as a whole. That doesn't happen until December of 1865 with the ratification of the 13th Amendment. That ends slavery legally. What is significant about June 19th, 1865, is that it takes place immediately after the Confederate Army, the last vestiges of the Confederate Army, the Army of the Trans-Mississippi surrenders. And that is the end of the military effort the organized military effort to maintain the system of slavery. So Black Texans are the last people who are brought under the control militarily by the military back into the Union, Texas back into the Union, and the end of slavery in Texas. So it's not the end of slavery by law, but it's the end of slavery in Texas by the military, by the force of the military. It's not, people often say, well, people didn't know in Texas that there was an Emancipation Proclamation. That's not true. The thing is, the Emancipation Proclamation could not come into effect in places that were not under the control of the Army. And it wasn't until they surrendered, the Army of the Trans-Mississippi surrendered in June, that Granger is then told to go to Texas and take control of that area. So it doesn't end slavery, but it's the result of the end of the military effort to maintain the system of slavery by the Confederacy.
And that's really important because it is the symbol of the defeat of the Confederate States of America and the triumph of the United States.
With Black troops. With Black troops in Galveston.
With Black troops, and that is really powerful. But it's also important that people do understand that slavery still existed in the border states. Slavery still existed in Native American communities. And so, and you do talk about this in your book, which makes your book so powerful, the way you are so careful with the historical facts. And yet you bring your personal story into this. You know, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALH, has for its theme this year, 2021, the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity. And your book is perfect for our ASALH theme this year. And I love the way your family history figures so significantly on Juneteenth. Your family history, and it's astonishing to me, really, when I read this, that you know that history of your family, which literally began in the 1820s, which means it's there before Texas is there. You know what I mean? It's in that same area before Texas is even a state. So tell us about your family. We want to know about your family and about your strong sense of Texas identity. I mean, you got a lot of Texas identity going here.
a lot of it going there. Well, yeah. My family on my mother's side And I can tell this because of census records that when they used to do the census, they asked people where their parents were born. Excuse me. And I'm able to establish that on my mother's side, through one line, that people were born in Texas, at least as early as the 1820s. And on my father's side, the 1860s. So there's a lot of many generations of people there. My great grandparents, I knew my great grandmother, who lived until I was about 11 years old, and she and my great grandfather had a cotton farm in Texas, and in East Texas, and he used to go to Galveston to work on the wharves, and that was one of the most interesting things that I found when I was working on the book this summer. That the story of Black men working on the wharves in Galveston. They had a union. I am always so amazed by people who are doing things, making efforts, doing things in the midst of some really, really tough circumstances. And so I wish I had talked to my great grandmother more about my great grandfather and their lives on their farm. But I know a few things, but I've taken that and some things that I learned in the census records. One of the most moving things I found was my great-great-grandfather's on a list, a voter registration list in 1867. And I just think about this person who sees himself as a citizen who will be able to participate in his own governance and being a part of the American polity. And, what pride he must have felt at that moment. But then also think about what happened later when Reconstruction is ended and the military, the troops are pulled out of the South, and white Southerners are then left to do what they wanted to do with Black people. And then there's Jim Crow and repression and lynching and so forth. So there are little snippets of things that make me want to go back and even do more research and to try to pull out the story even more completely. But we are an East Texas family on both sides, my mother and father's side. We're not a family that went anywhere. There are many families obviously migrated to California and west, and some Texans went east, but mainly west. But my family stayed in Texas. When they moved from their small towns, they didn't go to other states. They went to Houston, they went to Austin. So we've been there, and most of my family is there today. And that's why I have this strong sense of identification. I don't have family all over the country the way some people do. We're all basically still there. I'm the odd person out by having gone away to college in New England and law school in New England. And
I love in the book the way you talk about a Texas personality, mm-hmm. the way Texas is big. You talk about the Texification. Can you just mention that to the audience?
Well, people say that Texas is something of a bellwether of the United States. I know some people see it as exotic because a lot of crazy stuff happens. There's probably no other state, maybe Florida, where people sort of assume crazy things come out of it. But the truth is, Texas is a microcosm of the United States. All of the major currents of American history flow through Texas. You have westward expansion, in the conflict with Native peoples. You have plantation slavery, Jim Crow after the end of that. You have the relationship between Anglo culture and Latino culture. You have a state that borders a foreign country, so immigration is an issue. There's no other state that has all of those things together. They have one or two of them, but not all of them. And you can tell the American story through talking about Texas with all of those particular events. And so it's a place that is misunderstood in a lot of ways. The diversity of the state has always been there from the beginning. It's not a state that has become diverse over time. It started out that way with, Native peoples, Europeans, people of African descent. It's always been diverse. And so the problems that Texas has, you can sort of see in microcosm the problems of the United States as a whole.
Yes. And the memoir character of your book, I think, captures this in a way that is both personal, but also just it really does bring history to life. Um, and for example, your childhood, and you talk about growing up as a kid in the 1960s. And you're a little girl within the context of a segregated society, but it's a society that is transitioning. Integration is on its way. And I really would love for you to share this with the audience, the story of how that had an effect on you growing up, and the meaning for that world.
Well, I grew up in a place that was, as you said, segregated. When we went to the doctor, there was the doctor's office. There was a waiting room for Black people and a waiting room for white people. And there was a nurse's station that had windows that looked out into each separate waiting room. And I could see through these windows that the waiting room for white people was larger and better appointed. I mean, it would be larger because there were more white people, that you could say that, but it was not, that just wasn't it. It was better furniture, more magazines. And that's something that really bothered me, that they had better magazines than we did. And, we were a tiny room that sometimes you spilled out into the sidewalk if there were too many people there. When we went to the movies, we sat in the balcony because Black people had to sit in the balcony at the Crichton Theater to go see movies. Well, when I was 6 years old, my parents decided to send me to a white school. They were operating under something called a freedom of choice plan. And freedom of choice sounds really good. Who could be against freedom of choice? But the idea was that the culture and the mores and the traditions of the time would make it so that white parents sent their kids to the white school and Black parents would send their kids to the Black school, Booker T. Washington, which is where my mother taught, actually. She was an English teacher. But my parents decided to buck tradition and send me to a white school, and Anderson Elementary School. And they decided, along with the school district and the new town newspaper, that we wouldn't make a big deal about it, or they wouldn't make a big deal about it. I would just go to school. I was not escorted by police officers or anything. There were no howling mobs, greeting me. I did hear that there were threats against my family, but they must not have been taken very seriously, or it could have been police officers someplace that I didn't know, but I was not escorted in. My father drove me to school and dropped me off. And that began an odyssey in a way, very difficult, a very intense first year. My teacher, Mrs. Daughtry, was great to me. She was wonderful and was nothing but supportive. Some kids were nice and some kids weren't nice to me. And it made me think about race in a particular way. The waiting room and the movie theater, I didn't think about, that was just the way it was. I didn't think about it as an issue, really, because, I'm 5, 6 years old. I'm not thinking of it that way. But school, because such a big deal was made about it in my family, big deal in the sense that I knew I was doing something special. One of my family members, my great aunt that my mother was very close to, lived in Houston, and she went to the ritzy department store in Houston, which was Sakowitz. And she bought me just boxes and boxes of dresses and tights and all kinds of things. I mean, I had clothes. I was perfectly, well outfitted, but she went overboard because this was a big deal. I was going to a place and I was going to be dressed well. And so I knew that it was special. People would come, educators and administrators would come to the door sometimes and stand and look in to see, watch this experiment in place. So I knew I was on display and I knew I was doing something that was supposed to be momentous. I liked school. I was good at school. And I wonder if I would have been as happy or as it would have been as easy if I had problems in school, if I had problems reading or doing math or whatever. But I was a good student, and I was a pretty even-tempered person. So it was intense. There were many unpleasant moments, but there were also great moments too. And my mother did say that I broke out in hives once, which might have been stress related. And it makes me think, as I was writing this, I was wondering if I would have sent my kids to school like that. My kids did go to a private school that was predominantly white, but there were Black teachers and there were Black students. I was there completely by myself. And that's a pretty risky thing to have done, but they were idealistic. My parents were at that moment idealistic, and I guess they thought I could do it.
I remember reading in your book, you said at one point you wondered why your parents did it, but you also said that, I believe it was your father who thought you should go to an elementary school and then later to a high school. Mm-hmm. Could you just talk a little bit about that? Because I know sometimes people don't recognize what is good about going to these integrated schools at a young age like this, even though it's scary, but also what is good about still remaining in the Black school. I thought you handled that very well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was talking about the fact that I think my parents, as they became somewhat disillusioned by the effects of integration later in their lives, they sort of offered a different rationale for why they sent me to Anderson. They said, my father said, well, I was concerned about the fact that, if you look at white schools, white kids went to elementary school, intermediate school, junior high, and high school. Those were the divisions in my hometown. And Washington School was K through 12. And so I think he thought, well, if this is the way people are dividing, when they have all the money and the resources that they at their disposal, this is how they set things up. That must be the way they should be set up. And so he said, I wanted you to go to school, elementary school, with kids just your age and not be around older kids. So he said that was the reason. They also said, well, we knew the court was going to strike down these freedom of choice plans. And sure enough, they did. 3 years later, they struck them down. And everybody would have to change schools. And so they offered pragmatic reasons for it. But I think looking back on it, from what I can recall, I think they were more idealistic when they sent me, because this was the high water. I mean, there was the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. This is in that time period after the March on Washington. And I think they saw themselves as part of a movement.
Absolutely.
And this was, but when they became disillusioned, I think there might have been some, I don't want to say embarrassment, but sort of drawing back from that idealism and saying, oh, it was just a matter, it was pragmatic. We didn't have any great hopes, because in some ways their hopes had been, disappointed by the overall effect of integration. So, that's the great thing. As you can well know, this is the great thing that historians always have to do, is looking at letters and things when people are talking about the past and their motivations in the past. And if you compare what they're saying at one point in their life, if you have, and I could do this with Jefferson, comparing what he's saying as a younger man, that things change,
Absolutely.
And so there's no one answer, and it could, both of them could be right. Is they are thinking about, they're viewing things, they're seeing different perspectives from their different age and whatever. But I do think that their explanation changed over time.
Yes. And the other thing I really found fascinating, as you talked about your schooling, both elementary and secondary school, that you were taught Texas history. You were taught that history. But as you got older, and especially as you became a historian, you realized what was left out of that history you were taught.
Yes, yes.
And for many of us, and I think of myself, and I'm sure many people in this audience, when they think of Texas history, they're not thinking about scholarly books, but they're really thinking about cowboy and Indian movies.
Yes.
Or they're thinking about these iconic films such as Remember the Alamo. I remember when we were young, my sister used to love to watch Davy Crockett. So you do a great job. And she even had one of those little
Coonskin cap.
raccoon hats. Yeah. So you really do a great job of correcting the myths and the out and out falsehoods. So could you talk about this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up we took Texas history in the 4th grade and the 7th grade, and there was an elective. You could take it again in high school. So there's a lot of Texas history there. And you're right. The image of Texas is of a cowboy or the oil man, and sort of expressed in, if you want to see how Texas is presented and how the sort of tropes about Texas, the old movie Giant, with Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean, sets it all out. There's the story is, well, there were the original people, the cattle ranchers who had 1 million acres, which is based on the King Ranch, an actual ranch of 1 million acres in Texas. And they were, if not displaced, they were threatened by this new thing when they discover oil, Spindletop in Texas, which is not very far from, it's not in West Texas, but it's not very far from from my home. And Conroe actually was sort of an oil town too. And so those are the two competing, archetypal figures in Texas. But what they leave out, of course, is the plantation owner. And that would have been, I say in the book that Texas is a white man. It's constructed as a white man. And those are the two white men that they are, the cattle-related person and the oil man, but not a slave plantation owner. And if that figure were brought to bear, you would be white, but you would necessarily have to think about the fact that there were Black people there. And that's left totally out of Giant. That aspect of Texas is not there. It's all West Texas, the desert, all of that. East Texas, where I'm from, was a plantation society. And it was the aim by Stephen F. Austin, and actually starting with his father, who died before he could do this. And Stephen F. takes over his mantle, is to bring white settlers into Texas and extend the Cotton Empire. That was the goal. And they weren't going to do that with their family farms. They were going to do it with slave labor. And so slavery was an integral part of Austin's plan. He says that anybody who comes here, and if you don't have slavery, they can expect to be poor for a very, very long time if they had to come and do it all themselves. So that image of Texas that most people take in is cowboys and Indians and heroic people. When the white Texians as they're called, decide that they want to leave Mexico because Mexico outlaws slavery and they don't want to be a part of it. They're kind of looking the other way with the the settlers who came in, because they really wanted them there to be as a bulwark against the Comanche and other indigenous people. So they're not bothering them about slavery, but the Texians were still insecure about it. So they decide to break away from Mexico. And there's the famous battle, or we call it the lost battle of the Alamo that we're all supposed to remember, features Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie and William Travis. And these are the heroes of Texas. If you see streets and schools, I went to Travis Junior High School. These are the people who are fighting for a republic. Obviously, there were sort of cultural differences between Anglo people and Mexicans, different languages, but slavery is at the root of the problem here. It's one of the central reasons that they want to leave Mexico and start their republic. And they create a republic that has a constitution that, unlike the American Constitution, which kind of, hides slavery, talking about persons held to service, the Texas Constitution is full-throated in its support of slavery. And it says, Black people can't be citizens there. They can't immigrate there and live there without permission. So what do I do about the Alamo? How do I think about the Alamo and Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie and all of those people, when I know that part of what they're fighting for is to create a republic that no free Black person could live in, and a republic that supported slavery. So it complicates the message. And I'm sure you may have heard that there's real controversy down in Texas now about, what you can say at the Alamo. There are people who don't want you to be able to talk about slavery, saying it has nothing to do with the Alamo, but that's not true. So we're in a battle. They're in a battle down there now about the substance of history, what can be said and what people don't want others to say.
That battle is going on all over the United States. And, the issue is, what do you do with the facts? You can, as a good scholar, you have exposed these facts. You have, I think of our founder, Carter G. Woodson. It was his great mission in life to let the truth be known by showing the primary sources, the actual words of people. And you've got the letters and the statements from Austin and other people. And how does one say, well, we're not going to pay attention to that because it's not saying what we want it to say? That is the great challenge.
No, it is. I don't know how. Now, I will say I haven't read all of the legislation, but I've read some of it. And they do make allowances for teaching about Juneteenth. I mean, everybody's on board with that one. But I don't understand how you teach about the Republic of Texas without reading the Constitution. And I can't figure what they're going to do. Redact parts of it, the parts that talk about race and talk about, Black non-citizenship and all of that. So I think primary documents, and people act as if we just sort of made up a discussion about race. But people talked about race, as you know, all the time in the 18th and the 19th century. They wrote laws about it. They did sermons. The primary documents, as you say, tell the story. And so it takes a real act of avoidance to not talk about this stuff.
Well, let's get back to June 19, 1865, because, and you did mention this, that African Americans in Galveston absolutely knew about the Emancipation Proclamation. And they may have even known about the arrival of the troops under the Union Army because Lee had surrendered in April.
Yeah.
But one of the things you do with the general order that I find so wonderful is that it takes us a step beyond simply being a proclamation of freedom. Could you share this now? I want people to buy the book because you're going to get so much more. But I found it moving, actually, that discussion that you have about what the general order said.
Well, in addition to proclaiming that slavery is over, Granger also says that, and I'm basically paraphrasing, but he does use this phrase that that now the former enslaved people will exist in a circumstance of absolute equality with their former enslavers. He doesn't say enslavers, he says masters. And that's important. He didn't have to say that. Now, he could have just said, okay, you're free, now go on your merry way. But that phrase points towards a particular future, what's supposed to happen after this. And I think it's important because it hooks up with the Emancipation Proclamation. It hooks up, which, Lincoln also thought about equality and tried to use the Declaration of Independence, the words of the Declaration, to talk about a new birth of freedom. So in that order has a heritage in a way and puts equality at the heart of an understanding about what American life, the American values are supposed to be. And he tries to instill that by putting that language in there that he didn't have to put in there. Now, I'm sure that made the enslaved people very happy, but it made others unhappy. Obviously, people who had held others as property didn't want to hear about that. And as you know, they unleashed violence and retaliation against the former enslaved people, whipping them. People who, I found documents when people were talking about people being whipped for celebrating after they heard the news in Galveston and in these little towns. And so in places where the army wasn't in place, there were not enough troops to cover all of Texas, certainly not all of Texas, but not all of East Texas, where where most enslaved people were. But in the places where they weren't able to be there, be a force, people were forcibly, made to stay on plantations under threat of violence. People were killed wantonly. So it was just, it's a time of celebration, but it's also celebration in the midst of a lot of hostility and a lot of violence.
But I think it's so beautiful the way you capture this time as a moment of promise and of hope that was just spreading all across Blacks in Texas. All the commemorations in churches and in other places, the picnics in the 1860s and 70s. And I didn't get the impression that Juneteenth became less popular for Black Texans after Reconstruction, but I would be curious to know that, because at this moment when the world is opening up, I think one of the profound things about that document of equality is that it's prior to the ratification of the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, which creates citizenship, and the 15th Amendment, which gives the right to vote. And all that implies equality, and it precedes that. So I'm sure that is the hope that people lived for and with, even when they faced a retrenchment. But they did face a retrenchment.
Oh, absolutely.
And you talk about the lynching, you talk about this. But did Juneteenth continue to be celebrated, or was it less celebrated during the nadir?
As far as we know, it was celebrated. It has been celebrated continuously since then. The moments when it ebbs really is the 20th century, and sometimes when people don't think it's sort of old timey, to look back at slavery, but people kept celebrating it. I mean, it's a holiday that was celebrated in parks and celebrated at churches and celebrated in homes. And as far as I've been able to determine, it always was celebrated somewhere. People thought that it was an important thing to do. Emancipation Park, the records of celebrations of Emancipation Park in Houston, 4 men pooled their resources in 1876, I believe it was, in the middle of the 1870s, and bought land for the express purpose of celebrating it. And Emancipation Park is still there. I've been there. And I think that's why we're at this moment, because I'm sure there are places in other states that, I think Virginia has the Fall of Richmond. I think that may be April 3rd that they celebrate that date. And I read the other day, there's something in St. Augustine, Florida. They have a special thing that they celebrate. But Texans have been pretty stubborn about keeping this alive. And not only that, but when they go other places saying, and now you have to celebrate it too. No, we're bringing it. The diaspora has spread this around the Texas diaspora spread it around the country. And it really meant something to them. It's something that they latched onto, and they kept it, and they have kept it going all these years.
Yeah, and it's fascinating the way you talk about a 1-2 summer punch, and that's a fight, metaphor here, folks. But what Annette says is that, the family, her family, they have a major celebration. You heard Marvin Delaney talk about the barbecue and the red punch and all this other stuff. So they're doing all that on the 19th. And then it's a 1-2 punch, because then on July 4th, they turn around and they do it again. So share this tradition, because this is really what we're going to be doing as a nation now. We're going to be celebrating June 19th. And then we're going to be turning around and using those firecrackers for July 4th. So talk about that.
Well, yeah, but the thing about June 19th is that when I was growing up, it was a Black holiday. It was the Black 4th of July, and it was as far as I know, white people at that time period didn't celebrate Juneteenth. It becomes a state holiday, officially celebrated for the first time in 1980. And before then, I recall the local news would cover the parades and the picnics in Emancipation Park and other places. But I don't know how many white people celebrated it. But we celebrated the 4th as well. Sometimes ironically, saying, well, it's this really, nothing happened for us there. And my father, who could be really sarcastic, he would say, even on June 19th, the slaves haven't been freed yet. And what he was trying to do is to get people to think about the fact that things still weren't right. There was still a long way to go. But we celebrated both of those days with, we celebrated both of these days with firecrackers and barbecue. But the difference for Juneteenth was, we had the red soda water that we had to drink. Red is the red soda water, red velvet cake. Some people had strawberry pie. I read somewhere that people had hibiscus tea may have been the red, because they didn't have red soda water in the 19th century, but hibiscus tea may have been the red drink that people had. And there are questions about the significance of it. This may be, again, as historians, how this is. Are these stories grafted onto these modern day explanations? But I heard one explanation that red is supposed to be a symbol of the blood of people who suffered in slavery. But I read recently from a food expert, a cuisine expert in Southern cuisine, Black cuisine, that red may be of African origin. That in some West African societies, the color red is important. Now, I don't know if that's true either, but red has definitely been a part of this. And we did that. We had red soda water and barbecue and goat, which we didn't eat, but for some reason, I'm not quite sure how that became an item on the menu. Our family made tamales. My grandmother learned how to make tamales to sell, to raise money for the St. Luke's United Methodist Church. They were buying a new church. And so she would take orders on them. And it's a holiday food. It's sometimes a holiday food. And so for Juneteenth, I and my mother and my grandmother and her sister would spend a lot of time making tamales to sell. So you have this mixture of Black culture, Hispanic culture, Indians. I guess tamales are really it's a Mesoamerican dish. The ancient Aztecs and people thought it was sacred food. And so this is Texas, all these different groups of people showing it in this cuisine that we used on June 19th, Juneteenth.
Well, here's my last question to you before we open it up for the audience. So yesterday was historic. June 15th, 2021, the U.S. Senate declared Juneteenth a national holiday. So this was a momentous achievement for our nation and for those who for years, literally for years, have been urging the Congress to establish Juneteenth as a federal holiday, and a federal holiday just like July 4th, where people get off work and things close. This is amazing. So why? Just tell us why you think this was so important to do. What do you think Juneteenth is ultimately teaching us about our nation's past?
Well, I can think of what I hope it teaches us, what I think it can teach us, is I think Juneteenth, people say, well, that's just a Texas holiday. It's not. I mean, Texas is a part of a union, and we're part of the United States. And these were the last group of people, as I said, who were freed by the military effort of the United States Army with Black troops. The victory was won because of the participation of the Black troops. And it's a milestone, I think, in human rights history. Anytime somebody makes a pronouncement, even if it didn't make everything okay, but to say holding people as property by law is wrong, and that people who are held in that condition should be free and should be treated with equality. Now, we're still working on that last part, but the freedom part, where you don't have to worry about someone coming in and selling your children away from you and never seeing your family again, that meant a lot to those people. Whatever things had to be worked out, that trauma, as you well know, haunted Black people. And that's why I think the holiday itself is a family holiday of bringing everybody together, the desire to do that. And so I think it can teach people, not just Black people, but it reminds people about the importance of family and community. That's what the day really is about. The celebration is about giving things. The food is about bringing everybody together and talking to one another and listening to stories, playing dominoes, being in each other's company. And that's not a racial thing. You know, that's something that should be encouraged in everybody. And so I think that's what it can teach. One of the things it could teach us. It also could teach us about, remind us of the horror of that institution and some of the legacies of that institution that explain the racial predicament that we're in today. And if we can begin to talk about this in a serious way, we might have hope of a better future. But we're not going to get there if we don't tell the truth, and if we're not open with each other about what actually happened in the past.
Well, thank you, Annette. I am wishing you a happy Juneteenth.
Same to you.
Lopez. You're muted.
And I'm going to take some questions from the audience. I am back and off mute.
Good.
So our first question this evening is from Melody Hunter Palian, and it is, Dr. Gordon-Reed, how did the challenges of researching and writing this monograph differ from your work on the Hemmingses of Monticello?
Well, the first thing is the notes to the Hemmingses are probably longer than this book. The Hemmings is 800 pages and, you know, a huge number of endnotes at the end. And it was different because it's less comprehensive and it's more personal. It required me, I always think about writing style, whatever it is that I'm writing, I think about style quite a bit, but this required it even more. I had to develop a different kind of voice for writing this than writing the Hemmingses of Monticello, which is a much more, or any scholarly monograph is a much more detached voice. So that was a challenge, to think of creating that voice, to think of opening up, being personal, but how much I wanted to open up. I sort of went back and forth with my editor about whether or not I wanted to include names for all of my family members. And I don't. I mentioned my mother and father's names, but not other people, because I thought the more I did that, the more it would make the book about us and me. And I didn't want that. I wanted my family to be sort of a jumping off point to talk about Texas history and the history of the state, the Republic and the state. And so the challenge is to find, the biggest challenge was to find the right voice, the way to talk to the reader, and which is very different. I think it sounds very different than the Hemmingses, because it has to, because it's much more personal and intimate.
Thank you so much for that answer. Now, our next question, I'm not sure if be able to answer it, but it's related. It says, does the law signed by Governor Abbott to curtail the teaching of race include a constriction on teaching of the Republic of Texas Constitution?
No, it can't. And that's the point I was making. I don't understand. I don't think the law could be interpreted literally that, because it would mean that you could not talk about the Texas Republic, because it very explicitly deals with race. And so it doesn't say you can't talk about it, but it raises the question of how could you, if the real aim is to bar divisive, what they consider to be divisive discussions about race. It's going to be, a document that says Black people can't, come to the state. It will certainly make people think in a much more complicated way about the state of Texas and the Republic of Texas.
So our next question is very interesting, and it is, how will we capture the monetizing of Juneteenth?
Mm-hmm. How will we capture it?
Yeah, how
literally capture it.
Yes.
Literally capture it. Well, we're probably going to capture. Well, it depends on what you mean by capture. Oh, it will definitely be commercialized and monetized. I mean, this is the United States of America. We do that to everything, right? I mean, so it wouldn't be American in some way if it was not something that people thought they could make money off of. But the good thing about this is that there are lots of people out there, myself included, Evelyn, all the people, historians, people who've been laboring in the vineyards of trying to make this a national holiday, who are serious about this. And the interesting thing about it is that almost every, sort of organized effort about Juneteenth that I know of has some educational component to it. It's a holiday that is tailor-made for history and tailor-made to talk about the past in ways that are constructive. And so there's going to be commodification of it, but we don't want to say, well, we can't have a holiday because people are going to ruin it. I mean, we just have to ride herd on this and to make sure that the real messages of it, that the educative function of it comes to the fore, and do the best we can with it. I mean, Christmas is commercialized, but there are people who really take it seriously. We don't not have that because people commercialize it, and that will come with, and there will be insincerity, and there will be a lot of things here that tick people off, but it's still an opportunity to provide that kind of education, that kind of discussion about history that I think is really, really critical.
So thank you so much for that answer. And looking at our time, that will unfortunately have to be our last question. And so I'm going to bring Dr. Delaney back in, or maybe not. Thank you both, all three of you, for actually being with us today, and everyone for joining us in our audience. Please remember to purchase Professor Gordon-Reed's book on Juneteenth, available where books are sold. Please support Dr. Marvin Delaney's branch in Texas. They are having a Juneteenth celebration this Friday and Saturday. You see this flyer on your screen. So take a moment and check out their great events. Come back and pause this video to read the flyer. Also check out our website at ASALH.org. And so I would just like to thank you all for being with us, and have a great night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.